Hello there, this is Sohail Hasnie, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Let me start with a story about solar power. I think it was in 2007, it was snowing outside. I was presenting to a senior group of delegates as an ADB staff about how regional cooperation going to work out. Central Asian countries, Mongolia also included in that correct program, are all fossil fuel rich countries. All they know it about coal and gas, and it gets very cold, those countries, and I don't blame them. My challenge was, let me introduce renewable energy to them. And I remember I presented the solar prices are coming down, the battery prices are coming down. And by the way, the prices are 1/5 of what I was presenting them. But I didn't get much attention. At the end of the presentation, to my surprise, one senior gentleman from Uzbekistan came to very close to me and he said, Mr. Hasnie, I don't want you. You go back. Send us Jim Liston, who was the former ADB staff at my position. I tried. It took me quite some time, about 5 years. Eventually, Central Asia thinking got changed. Of course, not just me, everyone else. And that gentleman who happened to be almost, I think, minister or deputy minister in Uzbekistan, last time I checked. And he came back and he said, yes, solar is future. And my nephew is doing solar power. Can you help him? And he became a champion of solar power in Uzbekistan. Today, as Uzbekistan running hundreds of megawatt of solar power auction. I won't say that I contributed fully to that, but I did some work. Many of my former ADB colleagues did that. And these opportunities are going to come in everything that we do. And it's why it's very important for you to engage and look at solar power opportunities. I'll give you another story. When we wanted to experiment with solar, off-grid solar power, I remember it was in Malaysia, and we had CEO of quite a number of power companies just to get an attention, because these are big boys. They have big power station, coal plant, 1,000 of megawatt. You talk to them about off-grid solar, 50 watt, 200 watt. They don't care. These are tin pot. So what I did to dramatize, it was, I think, one of the Shangri-Las in Kuala Lumpur. We did this presentation in a basement. I had the whole setup. I asked someone to switch the power. It was pitch black dark. And everyone was upset. So then I had a battery set up. We switched on the television. We switched on the fan and the lights and said, let's have this discussion now. And they said, where is this power coming from? This is off-grid solar. So let's not ignore solar power and batteries in our life. It's going to fundamentally change. And that's the inspiration I brought in when I started the podcast during COVID. Solar power has literally become cheap as chips. You have heard that before. Now, why do we say that? A solar panel, its typical solar panel used to be the size of a 42-inch television and was costing about $100 in the 70s. So it was quite expensive. And that solar panel could only light up maybe one light bulb. You remember those incandescent light bulb for about 4 hours? And the panel was 100 watt, light bulb was 100 watt. But then the world changed in two different aspects. One, that 100-watt solar panel become $100, down from $10,000 in early 2000, and right now below $20. Plus, because of efficiency improvement, a single solar panel slightly larger than the television, we talked about 40-inch television, now can be up to 300 watt. So efficiency of solar power has gone up, and those appliances that solar power will produce, say light bulb, I'm using as an example, rather than lighting up 100-watt incandescent light bulb, today you can do about 8 to 10 LEDs. So you get 8 to 10 times more light with same size solar panel, maybe 3 to 4 times more electricity. And then the best news is that panel cost on an average about $20 today. And this trifecta literally created a revolution. That is solar as we know. Today, solar and wind, the renewable energy, consumes or rather produces 30% of global solar power, which really was unthinkable even if you go back 20 years. For example, Australia, per capita rooftop solar today is one of the highest. Australian population is about, say, 27 million. Total installed capacity, almost 37,000 megawatt. So it's more than 1.2 kilowatt per person, which is quite significant. Look at the domestic level. If it's you can produce 1.2 kilowatt on your rooftop for 4 hours a day, which is almost 5 kilowatt hour. And a typical household in Australia, on an average, still consumes 15 kilowatt hour a day. So basically, 30% of a house's electricity can be produced with rooftop solar. And just imagine if everyone in the world started doing that, we'll be in a very different place. When solar power, wind power was not into the energy mix, the world had rich countries, poor countries based on energy. So if you are countries like Saudi Arabia, the Middle Eastern country in Venezuela, had tons of oil. Australia, Indonesia, and many other countries, China, had tons of coal. You go to the Central Asia or West Asia, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan had lots of gas. And of course, North America. But today, everyone has sun. So that creates a very interesting dynamics. Every country in the world is able to generate electricity. Even a residential customer like you and I can generate electricity in our rooftop, something that was unthinkable a few years back. I have a house in Melbourne. I have about 11 kilowatt rooftop solar. Typically, I get between 25 up to 45 kilowatt hour in a day, which is sometimes way more than what I need in the house. I also have a Tesla Powerwall battery, which is about 13.5 kilowatt hours. So during daytime, my consumption may be only, say, 5 kilowatt. Even if the air conditioner is running, maybe 10 kilowatt. But I'm producing sometimes way more than what I need. And that gets stored in the batteries and can be used at nighttime. And the whole world is moving in that direction. I personally believe that residential customers, maybe the rooftop solar globally, ultimately be able to supply the grid during daytime because there will be storage facilities everywhere. And that potentially will minimize or reduce the role of distribution and transmission companies. But again, that's a dream which was unthinkable even 10, 15 years back. Now we can talk about those because, again, my personal belief is electricity will become free. And economists don't like the word free, but free in the sense you make a call on WhatsApp. I'm talking to you through Zoom on my podcast, and that is free. The incremental cost is not there. So solar power is a zero marginal cost because I paid for a capacity, then every use becomes zero cost to me. Now let's look at the world, right? I personally believe that future is distributed power, whether it's a solar power, wind power, micro hydro power, and the whole distribution and transmission network, which used to be basically power gets produced centrally. That's what I learned as a junior engineer working for a power company in Victoria. It used to be generated in the Latrobe Valley. It comes and gets dispatched to everyone. But that world has changed. Now, power can be generated in all the individual households, rooftop, and even in Europe, people are doing solar on their balconies as it is becoming cheaper and cheaper. And I read, which I haven't seen yet, that when you do building facades, it may be better and cheaper to put solar panels rather than just painting it, because panels are cheap. If you can get a per square meter for $20, that's really cheapest chips. And then they can be all connected, taken account, of course, safety and other factors. And every household can become a mini power stations. The total global installed capacity is about 9 terawatt, give or take, which is about 9 million megawatt. And out of that, I think I have seen different level of reporting. Some studies suggest it's about 2 terawatt, which is about 2 million megawatt is solar right now. And of course, one cannot just say out of 2 million, 2 is already solar, which is not correct, because solar will only produce electricity for during daylight hours on an average, or 3 to 4 hours to up to 5 hours a day, depending on where the world we are in. But still, that's a lot of electricity. And if we look at the distribution of those installed generation, I think Asia has about 60%, of course, dominated by India and China. North America is about 20%, Europe 15%, and Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries about 1.5%. And rest is South America and Africa. These are all relatively low amount. Now, solar is quite significant today. Although 20 years ago, almost nothing existed. Today, solar power contributes to 10% to 30% of total electricity generation, depending on which country we look for. And Asia right now, it's about 20%, just a tad over 20%. North America is about 10%, Europe 17%, Africa, mostly through off-grid solar, is about 4.5%. And Oceania and Australia, New Zealand is actually the highest, almost 30% of power right now, installed capacity, that is solar. Now, if we look at just 3 countries, which I think is very interesting to watch, is basically China, India, and Australia. China has 3,000 gigawatt of solar installed relative to their 2,500 gigawatt, that the total generation capacity. Now, if we dive a little bit more into those 3 countries that I mentioned, China, India, and Australia, overall, they have, say, China, who is leading the solar power globally, roughly about 3,000 gigawatt total installation. And out of that, almost 800 megawatt is solar. So roughly about 25%. So it's quite significant in terms of, again, generation capacity, not necessary generation. But I am hopeful that eventually solar will be able to supply 24/7 electricity, especially supported by wind, because wind runs 24/7. It's a baseload power, and then batteries are becoming cheap. And I have a completely different episode on the batteries. Now, China, 3 takeaway numbers is about 3,000 gigawatt. Out of that, 800 is already solar, which is about 25%. Now, if we come to India, total generation capacity is about 450, 470 gigawatt. And out of that, almost 75 to 100 could be solar. And India has ambitious plan to move. But the key takeaways, I'm not trying to give you a correct number because you can always look it up. Issue is that China has about 25% of total capacity in solar, just in terms of capacity terms. India has just under 20%, and Australia has almost 32%. It's much higher than China and India, although Australia's total installed capacity is about 100,000 megawatts. So not a huge amount. But all of these countries have big, big plans. For example, in India, right now, they have doubled their installed capacity in the last couple of years. And on the PV Magazine International's publication, in 2024 alone, India added 24.5 gigawatts solar, which is a significant number. And that includes about 8.5 gigawatt of utility scale solar. These are big power station solar. About 4.6 gigawatt of rooftop solar, which is quite significant. 4,600 megawatt is total power generation capacity of many small countries. And the bit that I really like, India had about 1,500 megawatt of off-grid solar installation, which is hugely significant because that's where I think the bottom-up solar revolution will happen as people, smaller, distributed residential customers whose need is very little, maybe less than 3 kilowatt hour a day, why they need to be connected in the grid in the first place. And I personally think they need to go off-grid solar. And based on these publications, and I will add all the references at the end of the show note where we got the numbers from. But the key takeaway is that India is going huge on solar, India and China. And I like the number in off-grid solar in India, 1,500 megawatt just in 2020 alone. And if you look at solar power forecast by end of 2030, end of 2025, the forecasts are quite significant that China might dominate, keep on dominating and install about another 100,000 megawatt. India maybe 25,000 megawatt. United States 40,000 megawatt. And these are huge numbers. Just to give a sort of benchmark number, what China plans to add 100,000 megawatt. This is equivalent of total installed power capacity all of Central Asia. It is more than double of all of Australia's national market capacity. And that's the amount of solar China planning to add to the system this year. India, not far behind, India is planning to add about 25,000 megawatt. So these are significant numbers. Now, if we look beyond, how far will solar take us? Solar is expected to go up to 2.5 to 3 terawatt by 2030. And again, as we have seen, all the forecasts about solar have been wrong. It's been a hockey stick forecast. People said, okay, we'll do this, but solar ended up doing much higher. There are a lot of interesting publications about IES, International Energy Agency, how they missed all the forecasts. I added a link to those interesting chart, and I, like anyone else, everyone else, we posted that chart on LinkedIn many times. You can look at all my LinkedIn posts, most of it with hashtag #SHasnie. If you search, that will pick up those LinkedIn posts. But again, if solar by 2030 becomes 3 terawatt hour. It could be even much higher, what we have seen. And that's almost 1/3 in terms of capacity, that more than 1/3 of the capacity of the 2030 at that time. Solar is almost 20% right now globally, as we've seen before. That will change everything. And why is this happening? Of course, declining cost. Solar panel prices are very cheap, less than 20 cents a watt peak, used to be $10. But the forecast is it will even get cheaper and cheaper. And technologies are improving the efficiency. So previously, say 1 square meter area, there is a sunlight falls in. It's measured sunlight irradiation, how much light you are coming in, and how much of that solar panel can convert into electricity. Used to be 13%, 15%, 17% right now. There are very high quality panels, which is doing 25%. So despite what gets told, it's not unreasonable to expect that by 2030, we might have panels commercially available, which is more than 30% efficiency, which means if you had installed a 100 megawatt solar farm, say 2005, 2010, and 2030, when you replace them, you might get more than double because of the efficiency that has improved. So what I will suggest, rather than going through all these numbers, we as a residential customer, I think it's about time to put a solar on our rooftop in whatever capacity. If it's off-grid solar installation, a tiny 200-watt solar panel on roof, and a small battery, and we can run independent. This not only provides us a backup, it also gives you electricity for free. The next stage, if it's a commercial property, anything that has a roof, there can be solar power producing electricity. And not necessarily all of these things needs to be connected to the grid, because there are protocols to be followed when it gets grid connected. Grid operators have to manage the supply and demand at given time. Now it's very common in Australia to get cut off by the grid because there's too much surplus rooftop solar coming in. Those can go into home batteries for customers to be used in either an electric vehicle or at night, or even God knows what future might bring to us. We may be able to trade that electricity to a neighbor, because a typical electric car today can store 50 to 60 kilowatt hour, maybe by 2030, maybe 200 kilowatt hour. And our appliances that we use are becoming super efficient. If you look at your television and check the wattage on your television, maybe you are watching this on a 42-inch television. If it's a really efficient one, it may be only 40 watt. But that television, if it's 20 years old, that was 250, 350 watt. And if it happened to be an old CRT television, it's very hard to find them. Maybe it was 400 watt. So residential customers, as we upgrade our appliances, televisions, lights, fridges, air conditioning, whatever we buy today will use maybe 1/5, 1/10 of the electricity that it used to use in the past. So I personally think it would be very hard for especially the developed countries to increase the kilowatt hour consumption, because it's already at a saturation point and appliances are going to be more efficient. But in the developing country context, yes, people will buy new air conditioners, more fridges, more goods, but incremental impact of those will be less because things are becoming way more efficient. Again, what's the purpose of all of this discussion is just for you to be aware that solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are not distant items that people talk about, these are something that can fundamentally change the life of you and I and everyone else. Maybe time has come that we can be independent producer of electricity. And if you are producing large enough, you can sell it back to the grid or to someone else. Because electricity is such an essential element to our everyday life. You pick up this pencil, and I'm sure with a bit of detail accounting, you will be able to say X percentage of the cost of production, this pencil is energy. One, when this graphite was taken out from the mine, there was a cost. The tree, how it was irrigated, there was a cost to energy. The machine that cut into that shape, that those motors used electricity efficiently or not, then packaging, transporting, everything uses electricity. And when I'm using this pencil to write something, I need to turn the lights on if there is no light. So electricity is such an essential part of our life. If we can reduce the cost of that electricity in our life, we can be way more efficient. Just have to look back to what happened to the telecommunication sector. I know a lot of people don't like this comparison. The first mobile phone I bought as an early adopter in 1993, it was a Nokia Mobira, quite big. I have photos of it with a big antenna, crossed an arm and a leg. And those days, it used to cost money to receive calls. Those days, it was unthinkable that one day we are going to talk for free, not only audio, but video. Calling international calls those days in Australia per minute used to cost, I remember, $3.65. So you had to, if you call somebody, you had to write down the entire discussion and then call because calls were expensive. Today, this generation talking with people, live video, WhatsApp, Skype, Messenger, Viber, you name it. These are all for free. And that has fundamentally changed the world as we know. And again, electricity storage and computer data storage are not the same thing. But again, I have a floppy disk somewhere 8.5 inch, which used to be 40, not kilobyte. Initially, it was bytes. Then punch card used to be bytes, then kilobytes, then megabyte, the 3.5 inch floppy, which was quite popular. And just imagine this podcast that I'm recording, if it's a 20-minute video, even with a medium resolution, that's going to be 120 megabyte files. It's unthinkable. And now that communication happening for free anywhere in the world. So similarly, once we start storing electricity, God knows what will happen. Because without the data storage, digital photography not have existed. Right now, we can happily take a good snap, high resolution, raw mode on a Canon. This can give you a 60 megabyte file. That's a lot of bytes and kilobytes. So thank you for listening. So my request is, let's keep connected. Let's look around and see what is possible. We should not shrug off things just because someone else said it's not possible. Because when mobile phone came in, everything that we are doing today, it was beyond imagination. But today, it's so casual, so easy. Future will bring a lot of technologies, and unless you are aware, you are going to miss out. Why do we want to miss out if that knowledge is so easily available and any product, the way we are connected globally, is available? So even if you are a young person listening to this podcast, I would suggest, please reach out to me if I can be of any help, but reach out to others. There's so many people doing so much interesting thing with energy transition, be it solar, electric vehicles, batteries, everything else. There's no reason to be left behind. Today, with the technology, all you need is a mobile phone and an internet connection. And if you look around globally, everyone has that access almost, at least way more than what used to be 5 years, even 2 years back. I'll use a small, simple example to make this point. I think I went to Kabul about 2006. I was talking to the energy minister and the deputy minister at the time, and they gave me a card, and I said, "Mr. Minister, can I have your office's landline?" And he looked at me. Everybody looked at me. What is landline? And I grew up with this thing. It's always good to have a landline because mobile phones battery may not be charged. To my surprise, I found out Afghanistan, those people, those government departments never had a landline. And the minister was jokingly telling me, we never had black and white television. We straightway went to color. And that's what technology leapfrogging about. I will welcome you to join my journey with Energypreneurs. I'll help you to leapfrog to the guests that I bring in on energy transition. You don't need to miss out. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.